The far left is always complaining that the right side of the aisle takes away all of your freedom of choice, and yet here we can see the Liberal government doing its very best to stop Albertans from exercising their constitutional rights. Welcome to Canadian Shield. My name's Sterling. Got a lot of stories to cover in this episode, so let's dive right in. We're going to start with an announcement from Air Transat that their pilots are going on strike, and over the next 3 days, they're going to be gradually scaling back their operations, mostly to make sure that they don't leave anybody stranded anywhere. Air Transat to gradually shut down operations over the next 3 days after union issues a strike notice. In a statement issued shortly after the mandate was announced by the union on Sunday morning, the Montreal-based airliner published a statement of its own calling the strike notice premature. Now, the pilots are saying that there's been ongoing negotiation for months and the corporation is dragging its feet, perhaps expecting the Liberal government, like always, to come in and bail them out. The notice requires the company to proactively implement an action plan and proceed with the gradual and orderly suspension of its operations over the next 3 days to prevent the consequences of a sudden unplanned interruption. Air Transat said it will begin suspending flights Monday, followed by a complete suspension on Tuesday. It will also begin repatriating passengers to prevent them from being stranded abroad if the strike occurs. The goal is to bring everyone back to their place of origin, so at least there's that. If you left from Vancouver, they're going to bring you back to Vancouver instead of dropping you off in Halifax. According to the flight radar tracker Flight Connections, Air Transat services 10 domestic destinations and 63 international destinations in 33 countries. The airline itself said flights are mainly in Europe, the Caribbean, East Coast of the U.S., South America, and North America. The Airline Pilots Association said the airline left it no choice but to issue the strike mandate. CBC is reporting there was an earthquake near the Alaska-Yukon border. Shaking felt in Whitehorse after earthquake strikes near the Yukon-Alaska border. The earthquake was registered as 7.0. No injuries or damage are reported. A modern earthquake struck in the Killarney National Park on Saturday afternoon. Earthquakes in Canada registered a 7.0 magnitude earthquake near the Alaska-Yukon border that was 5 kilometers in depth. Ground shaking was more mild, 250 kilometers away in Whitehorse, where the U.S. Geological Survey reported the earthquake registered at a magnitude of 5.3. The earthquake occurred around 1:41 p.m., and the aftershocks continued for several minutes. Whitehorse RCMP and fire department said no injuries or building damage has been reported at this time. In a social media post, a Yukon Energy spokesman said the staff will be checking facilities over the next few hours. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are doing their best to make certain that Mark Carney keeps his word on this MOU and that it wasn't just a political stunt to try to garner some support. Conservative motion will force Liberals to, quote, put up or shut up, close quote, on oil pipeline support. The motion calls for the government to support oil pipeline construction, adjust the BC tanker ban. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said his party's upcoming motion, which borrows language from the new Canada-Alberta Energy Agreement, is meant to force the Liberals to put up or shut up, quote unquote, on whether they support a new oil pipeline to the Pacific coast. The only thing that needs to happen for the project to go ahead is for the federal government of Mark Carney to get it out of the way, grant a permit, and let construction begin, Poilievre said in an interview Sunday with CBC. On Tuesday, the Conservatives will put forward a non-binding motion that will require Liberal MPs to decide whether they support the construction of one or more pipelines that can be export at least 1 million barrels a day of Alberta bitumen from the BC coast to Asian markets. The motion also mentions an appropriate adjustment to the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act while respecting the duty to consult Indigenous people. The wording of the motion is similar to the federal government's energy agreement with Alberta that was signed in late November, but it omits the conditions Alberta agreed to in exchange for Ottawa's support, like strengthening its industrial carbon pricing. This next story is about the Alberta Prosperity Project's question to be put onto the ballot. A court deemed that the question was unconstitutional, which I don't really agree with, and neither does the Alberta UPC government. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says courts should not be gatekeepers on independence question. Judge said Friday proposed independence referendum would be unconstitutional, but the judge is in a real conflict of interest because if Alberta separates, he's out of a job. At least he's out of a job in Alberta, or he or she, whatever it happens to be. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said anyone seeking an independent referendum should not have the gatekeepers like the courts standing in their way. Smith was asked about the independence question Saturday on her radio call-in show, weighing in for the first time after her government proposed legislation that would grind to a halt an ongoing court battle over a proposed provincial vote to leave Canada. She said giving Justice Minister Mickey Amery the power to be permissive about referendum questions, which is included in the new legislation, upholds democracy. Whether it's the chief electoral officer or the court, they seem to want to approve the ones they like and hold up the ones they do not like, and that's not democracy. Her comments came a day after the Alberta judge said a separatist referendum question would go against the Charter, First Nations treaty rights, and the province's existing referendum law. The Alberta government, the UPC, has introduced a new bill that would make the judge's ruling moot. The legislation also gives the separatist group, the Alberta Prosperity Project, the ability to reapply to start collecting questions for an independence referendum. If those seeking independence believe they have the support for it, this is their chance to prove it, he told reporters before introducing the bill. Here's an article about that bill. Alberta legislation would change citizen referendum rules, restrict political party names. If Bill 14 is passed, only the minister would be able to refer a citizen referendum question to the courts. The provincial government is proposing sweeping changes to citizen-led referendum questions that could put a stop to an active court case about whether it's constitutional to ask Albertans if they agree with separating from Canada. Bill 14, introduced Thursday by Justice Minister Mickey Amery, transfers powers from the chief electoral officer to the minister when deciding whether citizen petition initiatives should proceed. When asked, the minister made a statement, quote, "The reality is that the court's entitled to make a decision on any question put to it, independent of what we're doing here," close quote. If Bill 14 is passed, only the minister would be able to refer a citizen referendum question to the courts. That power currently rests with the chief electoral officer. The minister would also be allowed to recommend changes to a constitutional referendum question before it is put to the voters. Additionally, the legislation proposes amendments to restrict the names political parties are allowed to use, limit some of the powers of the province's legal regulator, and implement government oversight over a non-profit that distributes grants for legal, education, and justice work. Alberta NDP Deputy Leader Raki Penkoli said Thursday the opposition will fiercely object to the legislation. It should come as no surprise to Canadians that the socialist NDP government will oppose the Alberta government's attempt to give more power to the people. It seems that every time I turn around, socialism is less about being equality for every person and more about giving all of the gatekeeping power to the government while the people do without, no matter what that particular government has to say. It's kind of a strange thing that the socialists claim to be doing it for the good of the people, and all the while the people seem to be the only ones that are suffering from their decisions. I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.